Hello and welcome to Grouchy Geeks episode 43. My name's Scott and joining me as always is Steve.
Hello.
And this is the second time in the history of us doing podcasts that we've rounded out a whole decade.
Yes, that's a terrifying thought. We've obviously been doing it for far too long.
Yep.
We started off when it was rare and unusual, and then we've gone through the cool phase, and now we're just another Me Too product.
Yeah, it's still rare. It's still rarer than usual, but we've gone via being popular back to it being a niche thing to do again.
Well, every celebrity's got a podcast these days, haven't they?
Yeah.
Yeah, and then there's us.
But since we're rounding up the decade, we're gonna talk about a few of our highlights over the last 10 years in things like movies and TV and stuff like that.
Yes. So I was trying to narrow it down to a favourite, and I couldn't in the end. So now I've just got lists of really cool things, TV shows, films, and comics is what I've managed to get so far.
Cool.
So we'll see how we do on that. So where do you want to start?
Should we start with just picking one at random TV shows?
Yes, go ahead.
So it's been a weird decade for TV, right? Because Netflix came and upset the apple cart from like network shows and things like that, and then nowadays every relatively minor product has got its own streaming service.
Yeah. There's like 6 now, I think, or 7.
So I'm going to hold off. So I tried to think about what the highlight for the decade was going to be for me. So I'm going to hold off on that one, but I'm going to mention one that possibly, I'm hoping was from this decade. I'm sure it was. But it is a few years old and people don't tend to talk about so much anymore. But at the time, we talked about it a lot on the show, which was Fringe.
Right. God, was that this decade?
I think so. I'm hoping that I've not made a terrible mistake.
It finished in 2013.
Okay, so
it started in
2008 to 2013. So I'm going to count that.
Okay, yeah. You can count it.
And that was a show that was one of the few shows in the last 10 years that I kind of remember we were both a little bit obsessed about.
Yes.
And we were always talking and interesting things were happening. And it's one of the shows that it kind of feels like it was that old school, even though there was an overarching plot, it was that sort of old school episodic kind of a show.
Yeah. And it was also probably one of the last few shows that I've been able to concentrate on that ran for like 22 episodes a season.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which that model is becoming very redundant these days, but 10 years ago it was the norm.
Yeah, and you could only watch one episode a week instead of like the entirety of a season dropping simultaneously on streaming. Yeah,
and then watching it over the course of a weekend and having to wait 9 to 12 months to have it again, which is the norm these days. But that's people, I watched it in 24 hours, and you're like, really? Now you have to wait another 12 months, but okay.
Yeah, but so for anybody that's not watched Fringe, it's a show about people investigating like fringe science. So it's a little bit like the X-Files, but there's an interesting twist that happens towards the end of season 1 that completely upsets everything. And I found it a really interesting journey, and we loved. I've forgotten the name of the guy. Was it Walter?
Yes, John Noble played Walter.
Yeah, who we just at the time we just thought deserved to get nominated for every TV award out there. Who was just such a brilliant actor. And of course starred also one of the stars of Dawson's Creek, I think.
That's right, Joshua Jackson.
That's right.
Yeah, and that was the first show that I saw Anna Torv in, who's gone on to do things like Mindhunter most recently.
Okay.
She's in that, which I'm enjoying.
Cool.
But yeah, I think she's Australian, I want to say.
Right.
That's the first thing I saw her in. There's so many good TV shows from this last decade. I started thinking about it, and there's too many to talk about, so I'm going to rattle a couple off. Like,
yeah, please do.
Orphan Black.
Yeah.
Which we've talked a lot about with Tatiana Maslany, who eventually was recognized for her amazing work, and she received an Emmy, I want to say, I think. Into the Badlands, which was an Amazon show that's it's very, very recent. It's only wrapped up. It ran 3 seasons and it was cancelled, unfortunately, but that was groundbreaking and different and amazing in a way that I've not seen on television I haven't seen outside of like a Hong Kong, martial arts movie, but we got it weekly for TV, and the colours and the sets and the costumes and the weapons. It was amazing, amazing show.
Yeah, I loved it. So I haven't seen all 3 seasons, but what I have seen of it, which is season 1 and I think part of season 2, it was just amazing, and it felt like something that was genuinely different from all of the other stuff that was on at the time. Yeah.
You've probably had a couple of Me Too products since then, shows that have cropped up, but it did something that no one else was doing in a post-apocalyptic version of our world where some things are familiar and a lot of things aren't, but you're able to catch up, and there's mysticism mixed in with science, and yet people are walking around. So it was a great blending of things, and sometimes those ideas worked and sometimes they don't, but everything worked from even like the naming of the episodes were all really interesting, and the music was the guy from Linkin Park and things. So it just fit together, a blending of cultures as well, which we don't often see on modern TV. So really groundbreaking. But the one I wanted to talk about out of many that I know we've also spoken about in the past is Black Mirror.
Yes, which kind of, to me, I absolutely love Black Mirror, and that was on my list. But it's one of the things that it kind of feels like it's going back to a really, really old concept, which is sort of like Twilight Zone and Outer Limits and shows like that, where it's this sort of, different people every week, different story. But in the case of Black Mirror, it's all along kind of a similar theme.
Yeah, the anthology approach of where technology or the advancement of something in society is not as great as they think it's going to be, and it shows you the dark side of things, or the corrupting influence of something in society, like social media or television or voting or whatever it might be, and it just power over ourselves. And it's quite a nightmarish show in some ways, all from the mind of Charlie Brooker.
That's right, yeah. Who, if you're not from England, we tend to think of Charlie Brooker as kind of like almost like a comedian that would do shows where he was criticising other TV programmes for doing stuff that was slightly bankrupt and slightly weird, and that's an amazing feat, right? If you made a living out of criticising other people's TV programmes, it's very brave to make your own TV programme.
Yeah.
But fortunately, it was a masterpiece.
Yes, he was quite nervous. I remember him saying in the first interviews, this would have been about 4 or 5 years ago, and he said, after a lifetime of crapping on other people, I was waiting for all of the reviews to be equally as scathing, and he was quite pleasantly surprised that he got quite good feedback from people. And it's gone from strength to strength, because what started off as this little thing, I think it was on Channel 4 to begin with in the UK, it then went over to Netflix, and then America got really interested, and a lot of their big stars and actors would do one-off episodes. People like Bryce Dallas Howard did one episode, and other big actors suddenly said, "Oh, I want to do that," so they did things as well. And John Hamm was in at least a couple of episodes that I know of. So there was a new season recently, but I haven't watched it. I think it was only about 3 episodes, so I'm not up to date yet. Are you?
Yeah, so I watched it, and I'll be honest, it didn't. I just struggled with it quite a lot. So the very first episode is something that, because one of the things about it is it sets up a really interesting scenario, and then it takes it it explores it really well. And it was the exploration bit that I felt kind of fell down a little bit, whereas it was setting up a really, really interesting scenario, but it never kind of followed it through to its a satisfying conclusion.
Right.
And I think that season was the first time it had gone to Netflix. Because I think all the previous seasons were available on Netflix, but that was because they'd been shown on other networks first. Whereas I think this was the first one that was completely underwritten by Netflix, and it didn't quite work in the same way. But I still absolutely love the show, and would love to for it to just go from strength to strength.
Okay. What else have you got on your list for TV?
So there was a couple that are listed that were that to me sort of portrayed how successful this new model of things like Netflix was, which was the 2 that I mentioned, and I could have mentioned so many more, but we would just be here all day otherwise.
Yeah.
The 2 that really stood out for me as actually illustrating how special this new model was Daredevil, which felt like, that was really the first Netflix produced show that I felt like I really engaged with, and Stranger Things as well. Yes,
Stranger Things. Oh, well, and Daredevil actually were on my list looking down it. I think Daredevil was the first Marvel Netflix TV show that they'd done, because before that we had Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. on another network, a main network, and it was 22 episodes and all the rest of it. And this was the first of what they'd said would potentially be 4. But of course, it was a case of, if this doesn't work, Marvel aren't going to pour more money into it. And after the success of the first series, they said, all right, this has gone really, really well. Yes, we'll carry on with our plans. And they then rolled out Jessica Jones, Luke Cage, Iron Fist. Then they started coming around again. Then we got the Defenders, and then things changed at Marvel and at Netflix, because they've obviously set up their own Disney app and all the rest of it. And at least we got 3 seasons of Daredevil. That's what I'm most pleased about. I haven't watched the latest season of Jessica Jones. I think the 3rd season came out. We had 2 of Luke Cage and 2 for Iron Fist in the end. Oh, and of course 2 for The Punisher, don't forget.
Oh yeah, yep. Which kind of felt like it was part of that universe, and it was part of that kind of series of Marvel shows that they did. But to me, it had a very different kind of a feel to it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's just, there's no otherworldliness in it. It was very brutal and down to earth. But yeah, that was such a different show, Daredevil, and so special. And of course, Stranger Things. If you were born in the 70s or the 80s, or you're a fan of that period, it brings back so many memories. If you're a teen or a tween, it can appeal to that age group, because the main characters are a similar age. Older people enjoy it because of the nostalgia value and the horror aspect. There again, it successfully blends different time periods with genres, with familiar faces, with a whole new cast of actors that we've never met before that are suddenly now world famous. Out of nowhere, like
yeah.
I mean, I remember when this isn't on my list, but I remember when Lost came out, and everybody on the show, bar about 2 actors, nobody had any clue who they were. Never heard of them. They're all quite fresh faces, and now they're all in their own right. They're all massive stars, and this kind of had that feel to it with Stranger Things.
Yeah, and it just felt, it was obvious. It was very obviously at times playing tribute to like old Steven Spielberg films and things like that, and it felt kind of that they'd sort of managed to capture that feeling of those old movies that you used to watch when you were a kid.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And every season they do something slightly differently and pick up different pieces of different films from the 70s and 80s and 90s now.
Mm-hmm.
So we've had 3 seasons of that, and I believe the next season is going to be the last one, I think.
Oh, okay. Right, yeah. So I really love season 1. Season 2 didn't appeal to me. It had trouble, I think, sort of recapturing that feeling a little bit, but I'm still looking forward to season 3.
Season 3 is brilliant. It's really, really good. It's better than season 2. And I'm not sure it's shorter, but it feels tighter anyway.
Right.
So I definitely recommend season 3 again. Mm-hmm. Was Lost on your list, by the way, of TV shows?
No, it wasn't. Right. And it probably, that was a show that, at least at the beginning, I was absolutely obsessed with.
Yes.
But I just don't know. I don't know whether, so for example, Daredevil, I could go back and watch season 1, and I think probably get just as much, if not more, out of it a second time.
Yeah.
Exactly the same with a lot of these other shows that we've talked about, so Orphan Black, Fringe, things like that. I think if I went back and watched Lost season 1 again, knowing the direction that it goes in, I think I would just be like, it would just be crushingly disappointing, I think.
Yes, much like the new Watchmen show.
Yep.
So one show that is on my list that's connected to Lost is Person of Interest.
Oh, okay. Wow. Yeah, so that wasn't on my list, but it definitely should have been, because I absolutely loved Person of Interest.
I could rewatch that show now. It's 5 seasons, it's 103 episodes. Mm-hmm. I could sit down now and just watch it from start to finish and go through to the end and then go back to the beginning again. It was brilliant. Everything was brilliant about it. It worked really well, really small cast, interesting characters that develop over the seasons. Great kind of echoes of something like, for me, growing up, I was obsessed with The Equalizer, and this was probably as close as I'm ever going to get to having that on TV again. And Michael Emerson, of course, was in the lead of Person of Interest with Jim Caviezel. Such a good show. And it also introduced the composer to the wider world at that point, Ramin Djawadi, who then went on to have enormous worldwide success in the biggest show of the last 10 years.
Which was what, sorry?
Game of Thrones.
Oh, of course, yeah. Yeah.
Was that even on your list?
No, it wasn't. I'm at least, was it 8 seasons in the end of Game of Thrones?
Yeah.
So I think I'm 5 seasons behind, and I don't feel the need. As slick as it was and as good as it was, there was nothing about it, and I enjoyed it, but there was nothing about it that made me think I need to keep watching this.
Wow. Okay. Maybe fantasy isn't your thing then.
Yeah, maybe.
What else have you got?
So interestingly, actually, there is one show that is a few years old and goes back to the sort of, lots of the stuff that we've been talking about, like Fringe and Person of Interest, had this kind of old school episodic feel to them, in the sense that even though there was these overarching stories and things change from season to season, you could still just watch a single episode and get something out of it. And this is one of those shows and I can't even remember whether we've even talked about this before or you even watched it. And it's a show called Haven.
Yes, it's based upon a short story or a novella by Stephen King.
That's right, yeah.
And I've not watched all of it, but we've watched, I think, the first 3 seasons.
Right, okay. So it's very episodic, where she just sort of comes to this strange town where all sorts of supernatural things are happening, and it's essentially a supernatural event of the episode.
Yeah.
That they end up exploring, and the characters move on because of that. But it's still very. Each episode is still very self-contained, and I really loved it. I thought it was a really great show, and actually, I kind of miss shows being a bit more like that. Whereas, the trend is nowadays that each show is like an extended movie where you're watching the movie in 50-minute segments.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, make it one big serialized storyline. Yeah, but it's that thing of. Some shows still have 22 episodes a season, but they're becoming fewer and fewer as more people watch more stuff on streaming services. Yeah. And none of them have 22 episode seasons. It's 10, 13, 15 at a push.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I don't know if the serialized approach, other than on anthology shows, is something that's going to be a thing of the past. I don't know.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens when we do this equivalent show in another 10 years.
Yeah. Some other honourable mentions on my list. I haven't mentioned any comedies yet, but The Good Place, brilliant comedy. Brooklyn Nine-Nine, I absolutely love that show. Watch it as soon as I can. The first season of this show I'm about to mention was amazing, and it still plays in my mind now, and I still think about it from time to time. True Detective.
Oh, okay. So that's a show that I've actually not watched at all at the moment.
So the first season is really, really good. I didn't get the second season, and everyone said it was apparently awful and crap. And I've not started the third season yet. But the first season's got an all-star cast. It's Woody Harrelson. It's oh God, what's his name? I'll think of it in a second. Matthew McConaughey, and it's these two cops investigating what seems to be a ritualized murder in the backwaters of this kind of Hicksville town in the middle of nowhere. But it flashes between the present, years on after the fact, and then it goes back to what's happening in this pursuit of, over the case of many years, they're trying to find and solve this serial case. But it's not like it's hard to talk about without spoiling it, but there's more things going on. Like there's some stuff to do with spirituality and spiritualism. There's hints of supernatural, perhaps, but you're not really sure. But the first season is amazing. It's really, really good. And it's based, I think it's written by one particular guy. So he created it and he wrote it. So, and he's an American novelist.
Even though it's a show I've never watched, I seem to recall there was lots of talk about the amazing performances by the main characters in it.
Yes, absolutely. Definitely Matthew McConaughey. I think I don't know if he won anything for us, but he certainly should have. It was incredible. So yeah, that's worth watching if you've got time.
So if you had to pick one as being something that defined the decade, what would you pick?
If it defined the decade, I'd either pick Stranger Things or Game of Thrones. Because they're very, very different shows, but probably Game of Thrones, not because I like it more, but because I think in some ways it reintroduced the idea of adult fantasy stories to a wider audience. Because if I go back 25 years and I say to people, I write fantasy, they'd look at you weirdly. And then you come forward a bit in time and then they might say, what, like Lord of the Rings when the films came out? And then they might say, what, like Harry Potter? And now if you say you write fantasy and they say, well, like Game of Thrones. So it's introducing that idea of complex, political, religious, moral, ethical stories set within a fantasy world, which 10 years ago I couldn't imagine people outside of the fantasy groups reading or being aware of because they weren't. Not to the degree they are these days. What would you pick then for your one of the decade?
So I think that's a great example because that's, like you say, that's something that kind of is a genre show, but sort of broke out of being a genre show, and it's the last time I can think of something being, in everybody's mind. Like I walked past, I was walking through town today and I walked past a HMV. First of all, I was completely surprised that there was a HMV in my town because I just assumed that they'd all gone years ago. And outside the HMV was a massive like stand-up poster advertising, Game of Thrones. And that's a perfect description of how mainstream Game of Thrones became. I think if I was to do a worse job than you of thinking something that to me was maybe not define the decade, but was a highlight of the decade, I think if I was to single out one thing, it would be Orphan Black, and it's all because of Tatiana Maslany and that performance. Because it was just absolutely stunning. Just one of the best pieces of acting I think I've ever seen in any show.
Yeah, she was incredible, and I'm glad she finally got the accolades that she deserved. Mm-hmm. Right, should we go on to comics?
Okay, yeah.
Do you have any?
Sounds good. So I'm bound to have a much smaller list than you. So, the number one comic that I picked out was actually one that you and, I've discussed with you and Dan previously, very recently in fact, which is Mr. Miracle, which I just felt like, as somebody that has read and reads less often than I used to, plenty of comics. That was probably the first comic that felt like I was reading something. It felt like I was reading Watchmen again, in that this was being written by somebody that really understood the genre of comics and was able to subvert it in really interesting ways.
Yes, it was someone that. So one of the most fair criticisms of the big two, Marvel and DC, is that in some ways they're permanently trapped in telling stories, second act stories, because they can't have a definitive ending, because you can't kill off Spider-Man, Superman, Batman, you can't do it. Mm-hmm. And so whilst they have spin-offs and they have stories set in alternate worlds that give you that kind of satisfaction, it's sometimes still hard to tell a satisfying story with a good middle, start, middle and end. Mm-hmm. And knowing the restraints and knowing the characters, Tom King and Mitch Gerads were able to tell a really interesting, really complicated and really satisfying story, and yet also talking about many ordinary things, being a parent, being a father, being a mother, having a job, finding a balance between all of that, about society, about what are dreams and what's intelligence and what's the meaning of life, and all these big questions. And yet at the same time, it's an action adventure story with lots of fighting and battles, and so it's one of these things that you're telling a story on multiple layers. The mental illness, that's another big part of the story. Mm-hmm. So absolutely incredible, and it deserves to be recognized. And it did win Eisner Awards, and rightly so, for writing and art, because as you say, it's an important comic. And even if you're not aware or you don't read Marvel and DC comics, I think with a very little introduction, you can give this to someone. And if they like comics and they want to read something interesting, this is a great place to do that, to show that comics can be so much more.
Yeah, I would be really surprised if you'd handed this to pretty much anybody that they didn't realise. Even if they weren't that, they hadn't read that many comics and they weren't that familiar with the medium, that they didn't read this and think, actually, this is something really special.
Yeah, absolutely. A couple of quick mentions for some of the other ones. There's one that I'm pretty sure you haven't read.
Okay.
Called March.
No, I haven't read it.
So it's a trilogy of autobiographical comics about the civil rights movement, and it's basically telling the life or chunks of the life of the U.S. Congressman John Lewis. And he's someone who, if you know anything about American history, is that he was there on the day with Martin Luther King when he made his speech in Washington. He marched with some of the other people around that area. He was there on the bridge when the police stormed it. All these other moments in civil rights history, he was a part of it. He was right there on the front line, and he's one of the few kind of survivors of that era who's still fighting and still talking about civil rights. This is kind of on the level of Mouse. This is one of these comics that is an important part of history, whether you're American or not, because it's talking about the rights of freedom, about the rights of equality, about, black history in America, and all this kind of stuff. And, absolutely fascinating book. It's one of the things that, there again, like Mouse, should be taught in school, because it'll open a lot of people's eyes, I think. And, it's absolutely a worthwhile read, for sure.
Yeah, so I've definitely not read that, but I've just looked it up and it does look absolutely excellent.
Yeah. So that's another great one. You're talking about people who understand the medium of comics and what you can do and not do with it. One of the best lecturers or one of the best proponents of someone who understands comics, who's a comics theorist, is a guy called Scott McCloud. I think we've spoken about him in the past.
Yeah.
And he's written he's created a number of books about comics, but they're not actually stories. They're things like understanding comics, making comics, reinventing comics. And it's the theory and the history and talking about what you can do with the genre. And a couple of years ago, he did his first bit of fiction in comics for the first time. It's the same thing we're talking about with Black Mirror. It's a case of, if you talk about it and then you go and do it yourself, you better come and bring the goods. So in 2015, he published The Sculptor, and this is like a 500-page tome story about a guy who's a sculptor, and it's amazing. It's absolutely amazing. It shows you what you can do with comics, and it tells a really complicated story that talks about a lot of other different things from someone who's basically one of the most interesting speakers I've ever heard talk about on comics. Me and Pete went to a comics festival in Shrewsbury a few months ago, and he was there, and he gave this sort of half-an-hour lecture. And it's still one of the best things ever. Me and Pete still think about it and talk about it because it was so different. It makes you look at the way comics have influenced the world in every day. Fascinating. So, yeah, if you've not read it, highly recommend The Sculptor by Scott McCloud.
Cool. Yeah, no, I've not read that at all.
What else have you got on your list then?
So I'm going to mention something that is kind of like a comic in that it's very graphical, but yeah. I don't know whether you'll have read this or not. I'm guessing not. So have you ever heard of a guy called Randall Munroe?
I don't think so, no.
So Randall Munroe used to work at NASA. So he designed robots at NASA, and he became such a famous cartoonist that he quit his job as a roboticist at NASA.
Wow.
in order to do this comic strip. And the comic strip, which is well known amongst people that sit at computers for a living, is called XKCD. I don't know if you've ever heard of it.
No, I haven't.
So he wrote a book. He's written several books now, but he wrote a book called Thing Explainer, which is where he tries to describe some of the things that are most interesting to us using only the 1,000 most common words in the English language.
Right.
Which he's not even allowed to say the word 1,000. So the description of the book says he's using the 1,000 most popular words. Because the 1,000 is outside the top 1,000 words. Right. So just to read some of the chapters and to tell you what they're talking about, the chapters are talking about. So the first chapter is called Shared Space House, which is a chapter about the International Space Station.
Okay. Is that because station is probably, or it's not one of those words you can use or something?
Yeah, so you can't say International Space Station. So instead of international, you have to say shared.
Right.
Space is fine. You can't say station, so he says house instead. So there's a description of a plane cockpit, and that the chapter about plane cockpits is called a stuffy touch to fly a skyboat.
Right. Right.
So there's a chapter about laptop computers, and that's called bending computer, because you're not allowed to say laptop.
No.
You're allowed to say computer, but
Yep.
bending computer works as laptop. And it's all sorts of things like that, but it's really interesting to read sort of like the, how he illustrates all of these things, because they're all very heavily illustrated, each chapter, but how he chooses these words to describe very, very complicated things in sort of everyday language.
Wow. Okay.
It's really fascinating, and I saw him interviewed, and he's a really interesting guy as well, as you would expect. The guy that quit being a roboticist for NASA to become a cartoonist.
Yeah, that's quite a diversion.
Yeah, quite a switch.
Absolutely. That's not what I was expecting you to say from one thing to the other. Wow. Okay. Looking at I've just looked him up, and I recognise some of the kind of sketches that he's done.
Yeah, so he always draws, quite distinctively, all of his cartoons, even though they talk about some really interesting things, he always just draws stick men and women.
Mm. Yeah, I've definitely seen some of them, but I couldn't have been able to tell you who he was or what, where they came from. Okay, some other comics on my list. One of my favourite comic book creators, who's done some interesting things the last decade as ever, is Terry Moore. He did Rachel Rising, which is a fantastic horror series that's wrapped up. He did the 25th anniversary of Strangers in Paradise, where he revisited his now famous series and did a 10-issue run on that. Another book I think we spoke about when it was coming out was Sweet Tooth by Jeff Lemire.
Yeah.
This is a fantastic post-apocalyptic story about a little boy called Gus and his adventures through a new world and trying to understand it. And you've got a very naive figure travelling with this kind of very embittered, tough guy. And another book we've definitely spoken about that I think is worth a bit of discussion is Lock and Key.
Yes, yeah.
By Joe Hill and Gabriel Rodriguez, I believe.
And has been turned into a TV show now?
It starts in February, I want to say.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's when it is. I'm looking it up, but I'm pretty sure it's Netflix in February. Yeah, there you go. It's been developed for TV twice. This is the third time. But Netflix have actually said, yeah, make it, go ahead, do the whole series.
Right, cool.
It's done. It's not last time they did the pilot, it didn't go anywhere. Then I think someone else did a pilot, and they were trying to recast it, and it just kind of stumbled, but this time it's coming to TV. And that is an incredible self-contained comic book series. If you've never read it, highly recommend Lock and Key. Really, really good.
Cool. So if you had to pick one out of that list, which one would you pick?
Oh, I've got more on my list.
Okay, go ahead.
Black Hammer, those are the other two on my list. Really, really good. One comic from the decade. Oh, I don't know. There's some important comics. There's some amazing comics on there. I don't think I can actually this time. This time it's more difficult. What about you?
So for me, again, just to my shame, I should have read a lot more comics than I have. I think I would pick Mr. Miracle just as the one that, as I was reading it, was very clear that I was reading something that was really special. And I don't think, I can't recall another comic in a very long time that made me think, actually, this is something, they're doing something really interesting with the medium of storytelling through comics with this.
Yeah, well, the good news is the same creative team are doing another 12-issue book. Different characters, totally different thing, but they're doing something called Strange Adventures. And I think that starts next year. So there again, that's going to be one that once it wraps up, we may be getting together to talk about it with Dan and then try and pick it apart and work out what it's actually about. So, yeah, this is another 12-issue run to look for starting, from March next year. There you go.
Cool. Yeah, sounds interesting. Something else to look forward to.
Mm-hmm. Got any films then?
Yes. So, I've made a list of perhaps about 10 films, each of which I think I went to see, or saw at home and watched them and felt like at the end of it I'd actually seen something really interesting and special that moved me in a particular way.
Yeah.
Not necessarily, anything particularly profound, but I just watched and thought that's the filmmaking at its best. So I don't know how big your list is.
I've got about 6 films on this.
Okay. Do you want to pick one that we can talk about?
I know one that's going to be on both of our lists, Blade Runner 2049.
Yeah, so that's definitely a film that I went to see at the cinema and came out of it thinking it's not just a worthy sequel, but it manages to be one of the rare cases of a sequel that makes the original better by existing. Yeah. And I just thought it was absolutely superb. I thought it was a masterpiece.
Me too. It's one of the best cinema experiences I've had in recent years. That I'm so glad I saw it the first time on the big screen, because the sound and the scope of it, you needed that. I mean, I've watched it at home several times since, and it's still good, but the power of that first viewing was spectacular. The colours were so bright and so vivid, and the music was overwhelming at times because it was supposed to be, and it all was, just the director, Denis Villeneuve, is an amazing, amazing auteur. When we talk about certain film directors, not only have they got a unique style, but you can see they're bringing so many different elements and different departments together in such a unique way, which is why I'm so excited by the fact that he's doing Dune starting next year. He's shooting the first book as 2 films. And I can't wait for that, because I think he's the perfect director to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm so excited about it as well. And he's probably one of the very few directors working now that the fact that they've directed a film is enough to make me go and see the film without knowing anything else about it.
Yeah.
He's just, I just think I thought Blade Runner 2049 was brilliant. I thought The Arrival was brilliantly directed. It wasn't a movie that appealed to me in the same sort of way, but I thought it was brilliantly done. And the way that he paces things, it's not, you need like 10 car chases and loads of explosions and bright colours and things like that. It feels like he's directing things, that they used to be directed a few years ago. That I think is exactly the treatment that Dune needs, and everything that I've heard coming out of Dune just makes it sound like it's going to be another brilliant piece of directing from him. Yeah, and given that Dune is my favourite science fiction book of all time, I'm rather invested in this. Yeah, and so I'm very pleased with seeing his name attached, and all of the big actors too, but also him behind it all. So on, give us another film from your list then. So I'm going to pick something that's very different, but I don't know whether you've seen this or not, because I don't remember talking about it with you. But this is a film that I watched, and it's a very individual kind of a story. But I watched it and thought, actually, this is something really cool and special. And it's directed by a film director who I would used to go and see all of their films. But I think he's fallen off the wagon a little bit in recent years. But this is The Martian. I don't know if you've ever seen it. I have, yes. Written, based upon the book by Andy Weir. That's right, and directed by Ridley Scott, I believe. So what did you think to it? I really enjoyed it. Yeah.
It was a really interesting film, really good. I know they obviously had to change some things from the book to make it more interesting on the film, but it was a good film where a large portion of the action is just with one person on screen, which we haven't seen for a while, since probably Castaway, where you're so focused on one character.
Yeah, and actually that's a very good description of what the film is, because essentially he is the castaway, but on Mars. But just the way that he solves all of these problems, and that it focuses on just, you know, his determination to stay alive and sort things out. I just thought was brilliant and interesting and inspirational and funny and entertaining, and it was just, I really thought it was a superb film.
Yeah, really, really good. So I put this on my list, this next film, because for me it was something that I never expected to see. I never thought it would be any good. And it brought an end to so many things and the beginning of the next generation film. It's the way to do it right. It's the way to pass the torch and move things forward without ignoring or making a mess of the past. And this was Creed, the continuation of the Rocky franchise, which began the year I was born. So to have watched these films my entire life, and then to see many years later, suddenly, after a satisfactory wrap-up, after the horrible mess that was Rocky V, that he hated and wanted to resolve, and he did, and he came back and did Balboa, like 13 years later, whatever it was, and that was it. It was done. We're happy, we're finished, it's over. And then suddenly Creed comes back, and you think, what? And I was so surprised, and so overjoyed, and so pleased. Amazing. Absolutely amazing film.
Yeah, I thought it was absolutely brilliant as well. And as somebody that came to the Rocky series much later than you did, I thought it was just an absolute masterpiece of storytelling, and was just brilliantly, just a brilliant sort of handing over of those reins.
Yeah. Absolutely. So what else is on your list?
Let me have a look. So this is something as well that probably I just came out of the cinema absolutely stunned at having seen it. And I remember very vividly going to the cinema to see this, knowing absolutely nothing about it and being completely blown away. And I'm guessing that I'm certain that you've seen it, but I'm guessing that you knew a lot more about it going in than I did. And that's Guardians of the Galaxy.
Yes. Yes, it was certainly a game changer.
Yeah. And it was one of the films that I don't tend to, you know, even if I'm watching a comedy, I don't tend to sit there and laugh out loud. But I can remember laughing out loud in the cinema at scenes in Guardians of the Galaxy, and just thinking, you know, it's hilarious, and they just did an absolutely brilliant job of capturing a completely different mood to the other films that were part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
Yeah, it's just that you've got people invested in a raccoon and a talking tree, neither of which are actually there, and yet they're probably the most popular characters.
Yeah.
I remember when behind the scenes they were talking about the success of the Marvel films, and then they said to someone, "So what are you going to do next?" And they said, "Guardians of the Galaxy." And they're like, "Really? Why? Why? It's not a popular comic. It's not that, you know, really, compared to some. Why don't you do like a Spider-Man or this or that?" Like, nope, we're doing Guardians. I was like, oh, okay then, your funeral, and proved everyone wrong.
Yeah, just brilliant from beginning to end. Such an amazing film, and just a demonstration that they can do pretty much anything and turn it into something amazing. Yeah.
So one film that's on my list was that back in the day when we spoke about the Nolan Batman films, we said particularly The Dark Knight was an amazing crime film that just happened to have Batman in it. For me, The Winter Soldier is an amazing, almost Cold War spy thriller that just happens to be set in the Marvel Universe with Captain America in it.
Yes, and the tragedy of Winter Soldier is that it almost felt like it was them saying, look, we can do any type of movie within this universe. And it was like, we're gonna do something within the Marvel Cinematic Universe with these characters that you're familiar with, but we're gonna do it as like a Cold War thriller. And they did it absolutely superbly. And I took that as an indication of, that they're gonna tell all sorts of different stories within this universe, and it's really, really exciting. And going back to the previous film, which was Guardians of the Galaxy, we're now kind of Guardians of the Galaxy the humour was so specific and worked so well. It kind of feels like everything is converging to be a little bit like Guardians of the Galaxy within that universe now. But the Winter Soldier, I thought, was absolutely was superb, and for me was definitely a highlight of the 10 years of Marvel movies that we've had.
Yeah, and the fact he got people like Robert Redford in it in one of his last acting roles, and he agreed to come in and do it, it just shows you the caliber of the script. He wouldn't have turned up if he didn't think it was worth doing. No amount of money is going to tempt him at his age, and and who he is. So it shows you that there was something there to make him say, yeah, I'll do that. Such a great film. I think it is, despite the spectacular scale of something like the Avengers Endgame and everything that it achieved, bringing 23 films together, wherever it might be, I still think The Winter Soldier as a solo film is my favourite.
Yeah, absolutely brilliant, and I love Endgame kind of for what it represents. Yeah. But it was such a culmination of so many films, and just finished off the whole series brilliantly. But it doesn't to me stand alone like the Winter Soldier does.
No, it was so unique and so spectacular at the time. Any more?
So I'm going to talk about one film now, which is kind of a little bit like Rocky, has a long history from back in the day that seemed to disappear for a really long time. The later episodes didn't really do so well, but then came back with a vengeance relatively recently, and that's the new Mad Max film, Mad Max Fury Road.
I've seen it, yes.
And I watched it and I was just absolutely blown away by it. It just felt like it was recapturing the sort of movie that you hadn't really seen since the 80s, but they'd sort of done a decent twist on it, and to see George Miller come back, presumably as a really old man to direct this, and was almost like, be able to say, to the modern directors, this is how you do an action film and make it work. And I absolutely loved it.
I think he's in his late 60s, early 70s.
Right.
Now.
Yeah.
But yes, it was 25 years or more since the original Mad Max. It's got to be. I have to go and Google it now. But I remember at the time when it came out, the original one, Mel Gibson was an unknown at that time. 1979. Yeah. There you go. Wow. 79 the original came out.
Yep.
And it's gone right through to the 2000s for the brand new one, Fury Road. Wow, 2014. So a long time coming. Maybe they were hoping this would launch the franchise again.
Yeah, and I've got no idea whether they're planning to do another one or not. I haven't really looked at it either way.
Yeah.
So if you were to pick one for the decade, what would you pick?
There's two answers again. If it's a culmination of things, I would pick Avengers Endgame because the last decade has been dominated in some ways at the cinema by Marvel movies.
Yeah.
Because it's 10 years since Iron Man, or 11 years now even. So that's one way. But as a personal thing, a personal choice, I'd probably pick Blade Runner 2049.
Yeah, I would have said exactly the same for exactly the same reasons. The Endgame is just superb because that's probably the film that describes the 2010s the best, because this was definitely the decade of the Marvel Cinematic Universe and them essentially changing cinema forever by doing what they did and just doing it so brilliantly. But in terms of something that I came out of and just thought that was absolutely amazing, and it perfectly, being a perfect sequel to one of my favourite films of all time, was definitely Blade Runner 2049, and I just thought it was absolutely superb.
Yeah. I noticed neither of us have picked any Star Wars films.
Yeah, I can't. This will be, I don't even know whether it's out yet. I'm that uninformed. Thursday. This will be the first Star Wars film that I've not gone to see at the cinema, and I'm not doing it out of disgust or out of protest, or I'm not doing it to send a message or to make a point or anything like that at all.
Yeah.
I'm doing it because I'm just not interested.
Yeah.
And that's, to say that about a Star Wars film is absolutely unbelievable to me. But yeah, I just don't care anymore. At some point I'll get to see it, but I'm just not invested in seeing it at the cinema or opening. And nobody could be more happy if I'm completely wrong about this and it's a masterpiece. And it perfectly bookends, the whole 9 movies, and it does a superb job. I would be over the moon with happiness about that, but I just could not care less about it as it stands.
Fair enough. Yeah, I think I'll see it eventually, but I won't be going to the cinema to see it over Christmas, which came the tradition. It started almost the Christmas tradition thing in more recent times with the Lord of the Rings films and then the Hobbit films, and then they tried to claim that spot with the Star Wars films the last 3 years. But I've not been. I don't think I'll go this Christmas. I'll watch something else. I mean, there again, there's so much more stuff to watch. From when the decade started to now, that's another kind of defining thing. The amount of stuff to watch has exploded.
Yeah.
So that repeat viewing of anything is unusual, but not unheard of. But it's pretty unusual because you're thinking, oh God, I don't want to go back because there's so much other stuff that's constantly stacking up to watch. And so many new ways to watch things, you just can't keep up.
Yeah, so that's definitely been a huge change, right? That I know we've said this before, but going back 10 years, we would have all been able to confidently say what our group of friends was watching and probably what they weren't watching, but you can't do that anymore. There's just too much going on. And not only is there too much going on, the way that things get distributed and released nowadays, there's no, you don't have to be watching it at 9 o'clock on a Thursday night to get to watch it. So because everything just appears at once and then you can just watch it at your leisure, people watch things at completely different times to each other and out of sequence. And there's just no way of knowing what anybody's watching at the moment, which I'm guessing is a good thing, but it kind of loses out on that shared experience of being able to, see people that you know or talk to people that you know and say, hey, have you seen the latest episode of Babylon 5? Wasn't it a huge shock? And you just don't have that sort of thing anymore.
No, there's no water cooler talk, as they used to call it in the days. On your tea break, your coffee break, you'll stand around the water cooler and talk about the latest episode because it was on weekly once and that was it. And if you didn't see it, you'd have to wait potentially years to see it again.
Yeah.
I mean, I used to watch Alias, and when that finished, you'd be just desperate to talk to someone about it because you have to wait a week. There's no way to find it. There's no way to get it anywhere else. No downloading, no streaming sites, no torrenting. It's like, nope, you wait. And that was the only choice we had. So I miss some of that discussion, as you say.
Yeah. But, you know, it's a small price to pay for there being so much great stuff out there.
Yeah, yeah. There are now other ways we can talk about stuff. All of the, you know, social media has allowed us to talk to people and find people in the same group to talk about things. So, yeah, that's good stuff. So, any more?
I don't think so. I think those are the main ones that we were gonna talk about.
Yeah, that's everything I had. So, what have been some of your favourites of the last decade? TV, film, comics? Do you agree with us? Let us know. Get in touch. You can email us, grouchygeeks@gmail.com. You can come onto the Facebook group and talk to us there. Don't forget to check out the other podcasts on the Geek Syndicate network. Go to geeksyndicate.co.uk to find out about this podcast and all of the others. Right, but in the meantime, and for 2019...
Wow. Yep.
It's good night for me.
And it's good night from him.
Good night.
Good night.